we went on the break, we were talking about where we're heading as a country. We're talking about our annual borrowing plan. And we did say that in the financial year 2022-2023, we borrowed around 740 billion. And in this financial year, we might borrow more than 1 trillion shillings. Bichang, I'll just, I'll rack your brains a little bit for this. More than 1 trillion shillings. That's almost a third or even a quarter of what we have as our annual budget. How exactly is this going to impact us as a country?
You see, we keep on asking how come the debt is been going up. So what is going to happen is that the debt is going to increase.
Right.
And again, back to the question that are we living within our means? We're going to borrow more than 1 trillion. At the same time, we expect to collect about 2.6 trillion. So that is about 40% of what we're going to collect.
That makes us very irresponsible.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right.
Whereas I still sympathize with the engineer here because he's also saying we need to spend on infrastructure. But I think prudence should be relooking at our recurrent expenditure.
Right. Engineer, I must rack your brains as well. Borrowing more than 1 trillion shillings, development projects seem to be very bleak in this country. Yeah. What do you think about it?
I think all of us agree that we must now be more responsible. And I began this conversation by saying, personally, when I'm indebted, it's a little bit of stress because you have to pay and all that. As a country, we must think in the similar manner as if we were individuals. However, there are key fundamentals, factors of the economy that you can do.
Right. And
you do not collapse the economy in its entirety. We have advocated for a rethink on industrialization. Are we able to attract FDI? Are we able to make Kenya attractive to foreign investors so that then we grow the economy from the point of investments coming from outside the country?
Right.
Because we address the issue of taxation, issues of power, issues of making ease of doing business in Kenya attractive to people who are to do business again. So that we now think of other ways of creatively making sure the economy continues to thrive.
Which is the same.
So that then our dependence is not entirely on debt financing to pump money into the economy to carry out infrastructure. So we must now start being more creative, because we do believe. And this year we have a convention. Our conversation is actually on industrialization for economic transformation and employment creation.
Right.
Because we need now to think of just not being a consumptive or consuming economy, but a more producing economy, a more productive economy. Because look, when you have a productive economy, then the service industry, it comes in to serve the productive economy. Agro-processing, manufacturing, and all those kind of things. So that then we do not just run into borrowing to finance our recurrent expansion of that. We are looking at expanding the economy.
Right. Engineer Kiteme, the court will be issuing a further directive by 23rd July on the Forensic Audit and Public Debt Task Force by the President. Say, for example, and we're talking about hypothetics right now, say, for example, this task force does come into play. What changes do you believe can be seen?
I think everyone, and we have heard Kenyans in the streets saying they really want to understand this thing. The work of the court, of course, the decision will be made, and whichever way it is made, we will have to move on.
Right.
If the thing is determined in a manner that a rethink needs to be done, still we need to rethink so that we know we empower the office of OIG, or whichever way, so that then we have a way of really establishing where we are, because that's a cry of everyone in the streets, and you hear it.
Right, and
you hear it, people saying, okay, do we even know where we are? So that then we start crawling. We crawl and then we walk.
Right.
That's the big question everyone is asking.
Now, now that you've talked about word on the street, let's touch base once again on the ground.
Hiyo deni yote ikiwekwa public ama ikifanyiwa scrutiny, kama pesa haijatumika na kama hatuwezi weza kujua zile barabara zilitengenezwa, hao watu walikuwa involved in those targeted areas ili hiyo loan ikuwe approved, wanafaa waendewe juu. Hiyo inaweza kuta ni pesa ambazo tunalipa kama wananchi, lakini ni pesa zimenufaisha watu kadhaa peke yake. Therefore, me support that debt zote more so the zenye tumechukua internationally, sio domestic, they should be auditable and they should be put to public scrutiny, tuweze kujua tunalipa kwa nini, tunalipa kwa nani na tunalipa kwa sababu gani.
Tangu nizaliwe nisikie tu deni iko Kenya. Na sijui deni haijai lipo hadi wa leo. So nashindwa ni deni itaiisha ama bado itazidi kuendelea. Hapo ndio nakuwa na swali. Hata mtoto wangu ambaye hata sina mtoto sasa hivi sijui kama atalipa deni hiyo. Hiyo ndio swali niko nayo mpaka sasa hivi. Hii deni inakuwa tu deni kila siku. Miaka nenda miaka rudi. Ni deni ambaye Kenya na wao inadaiwa. Sijui kama tunaweza uza part of Kenya. Ndio deni ambaye ilipwe iishe. Hii shida ambayo iko Kenya iishe.
Wycliffe, those are very interesting sentiments from Kenyans. Maybe if you could just tell us, what do you think about what they just said? One of them said that we need it to be public, and you know right now the current culture is watu wanasalimiwa. So maybe if it's put in the public, there will be some, you know, public justice, and some of the people who are corrupt will be brought to book. What do you think about what the Kenyans just said?
My thinking is that currently all the discussions that have been going on, they are very timely. Kenyans are almost saying enough is enough. I think that's what I get from what the gentleman have just said. That, for example, the gentleman who said, "Ata watoto wake wanalipa," and yet he doesn't have a mtoto. So that clearly tells you that we feel that this debt will be paid by generations to come. We will live here, we'll continue increasing the debt, and the generation to come will get even a bigger load. And that is the discussion. My thinking is that when we now start being very keen and saying, you know what, let's see, how did we get here? So that we avoid even loading the load, because at the moment the fear is that today we could be in 10, 11 trillion. In a few years we will be talking of figures that are even beyond our own GDP,
right, from
the look of things. And yet we may not be able to see how that has spurred production in the country. And I love what engineer said, that we need to encourage production in the country. We need to produce more.
Right.
So if whatever we are borrowing is not helping us spur production, then we are losing it.
Right.
As an economy, we must think of what are these things that we need to do to increase production in the country, so that at the end of the day, in terms of, and I think when we start having discussions of our debt as a percentage of the GDP, the reasoning is that, let's see, in terms of percentages, are we also producing more?
Right.
So when you look at the numbers, the percentages, you realize that we've been going up, meaning our production is not going up.
Right.
What is going up is the debt. Because I think we've grown from 59%, 68% in 2022, then now here we are at 73%.
Yeah.
Right.
So that tells you that our production is stagnant, but our debt appetite is going up. Clearly, whatever measures we are doing is not, they are not encouraging us to produce, and I think that is the cry.
Kenya as a person is very irresponsible financially. If we carry this on our shoulders jointly. Engineer Kiteme, the person who was speaking, one of the Kenyans, was saying that they're worried for their children and they don't even have children. What are your views on what he just said?
That guy is spot on. And why he is spot on? We have seen countries in deep problems. I think I will mention, I think we've seen Zambia having to go for a kind of restructuring. We have seen Ghana, I think so. We have seen Sri Lanka in serious problems. When you now start thinking in those lines, then you know we do not have an option but to embrace more physical discipline. And we know sometimes you can sacrifice for the time being for the better tomorrow. And everyone in the street is almost saying like that. Oh, we can drop this thing, we can drop this, we can drop this, we can drop this. Because there's a consensus, a national consensus that where we are headed is trouble. Thankfully, and I listened to His Excellency, President, talk about when he was dissolving the cabinet. Towards the end of the speech, he said he is going to reconstitute a team that will still help him in some of these issues.
Right.
So I believe it looks like that awareness is still there. But we are not far from the Ghana situation,
Right.
the Zambia situation. And I don't want to imagine of other countries like Zimbabwe or even Argentina. Please, this is the only country we have, and we just need to make sure we don't go over the cliff.
Right.
Yeah.
Engineer, you have hope, which is fantastic. But Wycliffe, you did say that some of the recommendations that even the OAG usually gives are not taken very seriously. And this shows that we're not very ready to tighten our belts and to turn around our financial situation. Maybe tell us about that.
I will give you one example of a recommendation that I got when I looked through the Auditor General's reports. One recommendation was talking about paying commitment fees, that at times we borrow money, but the projects take time to take effect. And in the process, we pay commitment fees for those borrowed monies that we've not utilized.
Right.
And the Auditor General was saying, can we have our act together so that by the time we are negotiating the borrowing, we already have the project ready to go, so that we do not pay commitment fees on money that we've not drawn. That's just one example of those recommendations that have been given over the years, but for some reason, it's not taken shape. Now, engineer says is optimistic, which we support.
Right.
Our thinking is that now the president has seen the light.
Right.
That some of these recommendations will now be taken more seriously to just avoid these situations where we're incurring costs of money that you would not even have.
Right. Gentlemen, we are wrapping up, so I'll give you a minute each to give a concluding statement. However, I do have one of those recommendations here where the OAG had said that the government has paid billions in taking debts it plans not to spend, and loans acquired before projects are ready for takeoff show a lack of preparation that is costing taxpayers. I'll start with you, Engineer Kiteme. What would you like to tell the nation?
So, in project management, we say, plan, plan, and plan. Don't hit the ground running before you have planned and planned and planned. Look, before we even talk about acquiring this debt, let's involve experts in infrastructure to advise reasonably. Because some of the problems we have is a project has been conceived, we have rushed to please the populace or whatever for political purposes, we hit the ground running, then that project starts going through what we call variations.
Right.
You had a project like we saw in the parliament, this Bunge building, conceived for 6 billion, ends up 9 billion, or whatever figure. Huge, huge, huge variations. Why? Because you did not plan. And we have seen also multilateral or bilateral agreements agreed upon that are so painful to us. So we are proposing involve experts in infrastructure, engineers, in these conversations. And then stop also sending out EUI and say, we want to do this project, but it is restricted to nationals of China, Chinese nationals. And we are seeing this, so it is not right. Let us involve engineers, locals, who are experts in this kind of economy, in this kind of multilateral and bilateral agreements, so that we develop this country together.
Right, and speaking of professionals, our CPA here, what are your concluding statements?
I'll also take the same cue on professionals. I think there are two independent offices in this country that for the longest time have been taken for granted.
Right.
We are talking of the Office of the Auditor General. We're also talking of the Office of the Control of Budget. The recommendations from those two offices, because the Control of Budget tells us about budget implementation. We've seen reports saying that the budget consumption have been quite low, especially on development, and we seem to be okay.
Right.
So I want to encourage our viewers that let's take it upon ourselves to actually know what reports are coming from these offices, what recommendations are coming out of these offices, because we pay those offices to do this to us. And when they give us reports, we need to be able to consume them. But then to the government, very, very important to implement those recommendations.
Right.
The recommendations are not supposed to make the reports beautiful. The recommendations are actually supposed to be implemented. That is why those offices were conceived in our constitution.
Right. Clearly you're saying those reports are not just for vibes. They should be doing something in public offices. Thank you so much for joining us for this particular conversation. When it comes to managing the public debt, we're clearly not doing very well, but maybe we will be doing better in future. Have yourselves a very lovely night. My name is Hibak Saeed. Adios.